So, we're going to talk about a short history of digitalization and how it came about and give people sort of an idea of what the book is about. And the first thing to say is this is the first thing you gave me to translate. And then I learned this is actually a series of articles that you had written to
Yeah.
help the German public understand the history of the computer. And the weird thing to point out as we move into this is the computer just kind of shows up, the personal computer. Before that, you had these huge machines, but then all of a sudden it got personal. And there was the IBM. And it's all founded on electricity. What made you decide to look at electricity?
I was kind of, I have to admit, like, when I was studying literature and the like, and like had the idea of being the next Thomas Mann, I
Mm-hmm.
was relatively ignorant in what the computer world was kind of
Mm-hmm.
meaning, etc. For me, I recall like a day when I met a young programmer. He was like a hiker, so I just took him in my car and we went to Berlin. And he said, "I'm a programmer." And I said, "Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like the Bible, is it? Like your speech shall be yes, yes, no, no, and the
Yeah,
rest is kind of
yeah, the
evil."
pastor's son. Yeah, yeah.
It looked for me like a little bit like undercomplex. So like I
Mm-hmm.
was very arrogant, to be honest. So
Mm-hmm.
but when later on, it was like a totally different story. Like most of the people, so I was not like I got like a computer in '84. Like
Yeah.
that's when I was really delighted because like
Mm-hmm.
knowing that you can write text in a new way. But at the very same time, I got also like in deep into the sound studio, into sound programming in many ways. And I was also like surrounded by machinery, which was all digital, etc. But the real like moment was sitting, being in front of a sampler like the first time and realizing that you may turn every sound, whatever it is, it
Mm-hmm.
might be the closing of the door or like a toilet sound, you may turn it into an instrument. All of a sudden, like I realized the whole world turns into an instrument. And having played piano as a young man, and even I thought
Mm-hmm.
of like being a composer, it was like a big change in my head. And I realized all of a sudden the history of the virtuoso is over. Like, they're playing the scales.
Both the
And
piano and Thomas Mann died at
in both,
once.
both, yeah, the virtuoso was over, and I realized, okay, this is weird. Like on
Mm-hmm.
the other hand, you could say it's a big humiliation. I would say, like for our societies being confronted with
Mm-hmm.
the digital revolution, it's an enormous humiliation. But on the other hand, I took it as a gift because it was wonderful. The world of sounds all of a sudden it presented itself. And it would be like everything was kind of new in many ways. So you didn't, there was like the big opening for me, like a terra incognita.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't believe that anybody would like demonize it, to be honest.
Well, that's an interesting thought, Martin, because as I think about it, I too, it was around 1984 or 85, I got my first computer, and it pushed my career because all of a sudden I could word process,
Yeah.
I could do
Lotus one, two,
spreadsheets,
three.
Lotus 1, 2, 3, yeah, and I could
Yeah,
publish
word
a
perfect.
newsletter, the whole 9 yards. So, yeah, I mean, it was really revolutionary to come out of that time. But it was electricity, and we don't think about electricity, and that's the
Yeah.
point of the first chapter in this book, are these monks who become electrified.
Yeah.
That is the foundation of the computer. So tell us more.
The question to a certain degree was very straightforward. On the other hand, surprising because I wanted to know about the computer very early on. So
Mhm.
like in the late '80s, there was a big discussion of on artificial intelligence. So I went to America and talked to a lot of like these guys, and I
Mhm.
was stunned that like all these pundits, most of them at least, were
Mhm.
absolutely unaware about the question of the computers. They were unaware of the history of like the universal machine. So there was no connection whatsoever to history. So it was everything was kind of novel and new, etc. And they had like these fantasy ideas of artificial intelligence being all of a sudden like an electronic brain being even more intelligent than people and so forth. And I
Mhm.
found it very, I wouldn't say disheartening, but like irritating, deeply irritating. So I got into and
Ah.
because like
Why I'm
if you see if
stopping
you
what I
said
was thinking about is because at that time, when we first saw computers, everybody thought they were super intelligent.
yeah,
And
yeah,
that
yeah,
has
yeah.
played out into where we are. That you just, oh, you put it in a computer and it'll tell you what to do. So yeah, that's exactly what you're getting at, what you ran into, isn't it?
No, the story of Mr. Weizenbaum and his secretary was so bizarre. Um,
Yeah.
uh, and then you talk to these people, and you realize all of a sudden, like, there's a big thing going on, even psychological transference stories, which are absolutely weird. Like, and the story of Mr. Weizenbaum was like absolutely stunning. It did not leave my mind. So he had like a secretary who knew he was working on a chatbot. This chatbot was
Hmm.
called Eliza because of Eliza Doolittle in like George Bernard Shaw's
Hmm.
Pygmalion's piece, which is about an artificial human being, etc. So she knows that her boss is like just writing a program. This program is not very sophisticated. It's just like a paraphrasing
Hmm.
machine, basically.
Hmm.
So you say, I feel so bad, and the computer aspect, you feel so bad. Like it's not
Hmm.
very complicated. Like I could have done it myself. So
Hmm.
like Mr. Weizenbaum had like the secretary, and she was typing and typing and typing and typing, and like he was wondering, so what is
Hmm.
she doing all day long? I don't give her that much things to do. um and then he one day, because she didn't realize it was coming in, so he just like stood behind her shoulder, looked into the computer screen, and saw, I feel so bad. And the computer was
Oh
answering,
yeah.
really, you feel so bad, etc. And then he was realizing his secretary knows that this is just a
Mhm,
program. It's not a human being. It's a paraphrasing machine. But she takes the machine as like a mechanical psychoanalyst. And all of a sudden, I realized all these people talking about superintelligence and the like,
mhm,
artificial intelligence, they kind of use like the computer as a mechanical psychoanalyst to self-aggrandize, to feel
mhm,
better, whatever. Like, and
mhm,
this transference moment was really big. I was wondering, how is it even something like that is possible? And then you ask for what is a computer? Like a very simple question.
sure.
And then you realize, okay, a computer has not a finite objective, etc. You might use it as a text processor, you might use it as a spreadsheet, you might
Mhm,
use it like to store, for example, like a sound, like a toilet flush and the like. And all of a sudden you see it's endless. And
mhm,
this endless element is really the surprising moment, because you say, okay, it's a universal machine. It's not a
mhm,
tool, it's not a medium, it's a like an environment, it's a workshop.
mhm,
And this was the most stunning element. And this made me think of like if something like that had happened before the clockwork of the Middle Ages. And
mhm,
that's the reason I got into electricity, because I realized the people who had talked about the mechanical world, so they took like the hero figures of like Descartes. But we know Descartes shows up in the 17th century, but the clockwork is there in the 12th century. So he's late 5 centuries. So what's going on
mhm,
here? Maybe
mhm.
transference? Maybe like
Maybe,
a story.
perhaps.
Yeah, like a story
Yeah.
which is just kind of like a cultural unconscious. So when I was thinking about digitalization, my editor asked me, okay, so after having read a science fiction book for him, could you think of like a history of digitization, because nobody knows one? And I said, sure, I do that. So it will turn out to be a series for the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. And I was like taking all these guys in a series, like writing about them
Mhm,
and like getting to the psychology. But the first thing for me was absolutely evident. It's starting not with like, Alan Turing and the like, it's starting with electricity.
energy. And this is the interesting question about energy and why that strikes me so important is, I mean, many conversations we've had, and finally trying to understand the difference between the tree fork, the drive, the social drive, and the Geselliff Shaft's tree work, and the social drive and the social drive. And it's this energy, this question of energy that starts with electricity. And it starts with this weird scene in northern France of
Yeah.
these monks being wired together. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so I was going back like to the 18th century. Like, normally, like people would not do that because they would say like the computer is a Turing machine, it's a Neumann machine, it's a machine which has been like made in the Second World War and so and the like. So although like the first machine, like the real first computer was built by Charles Babbage, like, which had all the characteristics of a computer, although it was mechanical, etc. It didn't use like Boolean, like binary logic as a machine. It was like there present. It was driven by a punch cards. But my story was I wanted to really get back into the beginnings, etc. And I saw like with the mechanical clock, it was beginning as a mill. I saw like there's something serious because on the other hand, you would say, for example, somebody having like a weird idea about the computer. So it's so weird. Why was it so successful? Basically, because like energy, like people were using, they could like spare and save energy, etc. Make something faster, easier, and so forth. So the energy question was all over the place. Um, so I looked for electricity. I knew like every computer is kind of like powered by electricity. So I was going to the history of electricity. And all of a sudden, then like reading about Stephen Gray, like the first one of these first guys, like who thought about the lines of communication get longer and longer. And then I saw read like a little passage, paragraph about the first experiment of Jean-Antoine Nollet about these monks being assembled on a field in northern France, and wiring each other with copper wire. And one of these monks, Monsieur Mundoli, in the end, like he touches a little antenna which looks out of the jar, the Leyden jar. And what happens? All these monks start twitching. And that was that was an eye opener. Even it was like as if I could see the internet, the becoming of the internet, getting into the world right away, twitching monks, etc. So like a little bit like the story of like this me being a child, um, hearing like this like, people yelling like goal, 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 and so I saw like a new massified society coming into being, etc. And I knew right away, okay, this is the beginning of mass psychology. This is the beginning of the nation state. This is the beginning of a new world in many ways. And even if you ask very simple questions, once again, like these childhood questions, so you ask yourself, what is writing in a computer? Like, for example, if you take the tokens of the alphabet, they're just like digitized. So what's the difference if you take like a sound or like a little text? There's no difference whatsoever on the level of the binary code. Everything gets kind of like transformed into binary code. It could be even like wipe and like away movement of somebody arranging like the sex market in the so it's like nothing but like a yeah Tinder whatever. So like there's no all of a sudden like language is everything which may be electrified and then digitalized. So all of a sudden, like the realm of language is opening up. It's in an enormous way. It could be a social plastic, it could be the position movements of a whale, it could be anything whatsoever. Everything turns into language because it's written now in a way. It can be treated as language. And there was like a eye opener. Once again, like this Thomas Mann story is kind of finished. If you see, oh, my privilege is not the alphabet anymore, but my privilege should be understanding what writing in the digital age means. So that would be the task.
I remember at the time, as I was learning, because my question's all about the simulacrum and this notion that anything that becomes digitalized can become anything is the story of the simulacrum, which
Yeah.
is the lost form. And it all starts with these monks. So we have monks, we have electricity is being explored, and as you've alluded to it, it becomes mass society. But let's look at that a little bit closer. How do we move from Abino Lee and the Leyden jar and these monks being electrified together to a nation state? What's the story with because we get into the French Revolution, don't we,
Yeah, yeah.
along the way?
The funny thing is, like, if you read like people who try to decipher and deconstruct the nation state, they like turn into a riddle, etc. Because like every nation state, like every nation fantasies itself like being very old.
Mhm.
And that, for example, they would go to the Middle Ages, even further, etc. And if these people knew that the nation state is relatively recent phenomenon, etc., that it like started basically in the 18th century, they would be a little bit like, I wouldn't say pissed off, but a little bit irritated. So like, and that was like
Humiliated.
humiliated, yeah. So there's like this pundit like Mr. Benedict Anderson who wrote about that. Like,
Mhm.
absolutely right in this observation that the nation state is a recent phenomenon, and he called this
Mhm.
book an imagined community. Meaning, so it's the imagination which is the glue for society. It's not something. It's not blood and soil. It's imagination. So, but who powers the imagination? Okay, how is it powered, etc.? His answer should have been, in my understanding, Monsieur Abinuli, electricity. That's the power of the nation state. Yeah. But he came up with a totally different explanation. He said, like, it's printing press. So I couldn't believe it because if he had read about the history of telematics,
Mhm.
Abinuli, and the history of the optical telegraph, etc., and like the telegraphic society in general of the 19th century, would have said, yeah, maybe like the nation state and telegraphy and telematics are deeply, deeply linked. And maybe like even the story of colonization being powered by like locomotion and being powered by telegraphy, like basically,
Mhm.
is like the story of the first globalization, as people say it, the story of the thematic society.
Mhm.
But he didn't come up with this solution. He took like the printing press because he was all focused on a very old cultural technique. But this old cultural technique got superseded by a new one, and he didn't take it. So, and that was for me really funny. Like, if you see like people thinking about the Hobsbawm, for example, right? He's thinking about the history of the nation state, like he wonders about it, but he doesn't come up with a solution. The solution would be, I would say, the nation state is a symptom of the massified society which emerges in the 18th century and gets bigger and bigger and bigger. It gets faster and faster and faster. And it's even like getting into the psyche transference of every individual so that people might sit at home, etc., all alone in
Mhm.
front of the TV, etc. All of a sudden, like the whole nation is yelling, "Go!"
Mhm. Yes, this is the story of you as a 9-year-old
Yeah,
who can't take the excitement of this football
yeah,
game that is going into overtime,
yeah,
so you leave and you go walking out in the
yeah,
street.
yeah.
All of a sudden you hear, "What do you hear, my dear? What
I
do you
hear
hear?"
all these like I knew it was so weird because it was like a very I wouldn't say medieval city, but like old houses, etc.
Mhm.
And then you see like all these old houses, you're in the midst of like a very old-fashioned world in many ways. Nobody's out there. I was just all alone because I couldn't stand it,
Mhm.
the excitement. And all of a sudden I hear all these people yelling. Go. And it's so like, but like every house, like it was so weird. And all of a sudden, like you see like an empty street and you hear this cry, etc. And that was like absolutely stunning. And I realized all of a sudden, like, I could imagine like whole Germany sitting in front of a TV screen yelling, etc. Everybody was all alone. And that was like the twitching monks in a way, but now they were connected not by they were connected by electricity, by like looking at the TV,
But a
but
different
also by
kind of
this idea,
electricity. Yes.
the nation, the
Yes.
nation was playing football against like Great Britain. They lost.
They lost. And what's interesting here, I think, and just kind of pulling things together between the first chapter and the second chapter and the story of electricity and mesmerization is that you now have an electrified state, but it's no longer connected physically by wires of the monks, but it's psychically. The
Yeah.
power is now powering this computer or just digitally so we can communicate. And the world, there's no distance. We're now into this computer space where there is no distance. And it all comes back to this experiment that they're doing with the Abbé Noli, of how fast does electricity move? Does it move as fast as angels? Angels
Yeah.
moving from here to there. And
Yes, you see, and this is the you see the mode of transference playing out in a very Freudian, like psychoanalytical term, as
mhm,
like with the secretary of Mr. Weizenbaum. So
sure.
like she knows she could know, okay, so this is just a machine. I'm sitting in front of the machine. That's it. She's kind of projecting something into the machine, and this projection works. So it makes her get into a dialogue, etc. So you
Mm,
could say, okay, we're kind of connected with a wire, etc. We might not even connect it with a wire. Like in the case of like Mesmer, it was just like a mental constellation. People sitting in front of a basin of water, etc. They
mhm,
were not. They were kind of like connected to water, but there was no electricity in play. But the idea of the NM electricity worked anyway.
mhm,
So all of a sudden, like you see like a transference playing out, and all of a sudden people projecting into the machine certain elements, and all of a sudden it gets real. And this was one of these most stunning elements that energy turns out to be like a mental energy also. It kind of replicates
mhm,
itself as an
mhm,
illusion which is kind of getting real, even like in the case of like the nation state, etc. And that was really stunning because like all of a sudden like I realized that it's not only the material machine, but it's also like the psychology of the machine which you have to take into account. And that was the whole story of like also like the mechanical clock, going back to beginning as something very
sure.
material, like as a mill, etc., as an energetic machine, etc. But later on, you can say, okay, all our values, even punctuality, tactfulness, getting to our psyche. So we organize ourselves in a way as the machine's organized. So we kind of like comply to a certain degree to the demands of the machine. Say, yeah, we want to be like a machine ourselves.
W yes, and, there's a couple of things going on here which early on took me a while to actually get my head around it, is because you talked about the psychical apparatus. And you also talked about the psychic economy, which is a very basic thing. And when we talk about this telematic communication without physical connection, we are talking about one to the other. We're talking about a space that doesn't have any distance. And we're also talking about the power of imagination that powers this as something called a metaphysical battery. But I'm jumping probably way too ahead of, with this thought. It's just where it all goes. And maybe a good way to exemplify this is back to the story of Mesmer. Mesmer's hypnosis. It takes off. The world is going, it's just ablaze. Paris is ablaze, but it starts to get political. It all of a
Sure.
sudden starts to politicized. People start to become essentially telematically electrified with the notion of being free, of wanting to have they become massified as a nation state, and it becomes dangerous. And Mesmer has to leave Paris. Can you tell us more about this?
Yeah, I mean, Mesmer, he was like a natural philosopher anyway. So he got to know about and he got to know
Mm-hmm.
about electricity. He was convinced that every human being has in itself like animal electricity. We
Mm-hmm.
kind of like electrical beings, etc., which is connecting us. In the same way, like Swedenborg had like this weird idea that you might telematically be in like a communication with other spiritual beings. So that was like
Mm-hmm.
Mesmer's idea, and like he said like, okay, it could also be like a healing process, like being in like our real feelings, etc., being electrified. So that's why he was like assembled. In a way, he was just repeating what Abenoli did, but without
Mm-hmm.
electricity. So all these people were assembled in a room. There was a glass harmonica, which was a product of like Benjamin Franklin playing, etc. Like
Mm-hmm.
esoteric images in the background. And the people felt very woke and like inspired, etc. And like they were just like connected with a rope to like this basin in the middle of the room, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, there was no electricity at play. no electricity whatsoever. Nevertheless, all of a sudden, like when like Mesmer came into this room and said, "Ah, something's happening here," everybody got like euphoric, and like people like were crying or getting to orgasms, whatever. Like, which was
Yeah.
like all of a sudden you get like mass psychology playing out, and you see like a material energy like getting into your head, working as
Mhm.
kind of like an expectation machine, etc. And all of a sudden you
Mhm.
expect something going on, etc. Like getting aesthetic, so to speak. So you
Mhm.
see the transformation of energy into a mindset. And
Mhm.
once again, you can say, okay, what is it? It's transference in a very literal sense. Like in this case, you're not projecting. You're taking something that's like making you a higher being. Electricity,
Mhm.
it like symbolizes in a way your connectivity to the world. So that's what's happening with the mesmer. So they get like everybody like looking first and foremost for personal salvation, but the people kind of feel all of a sudden like, okay, we're connected, we're a group,
Mhm.
etc. That's why they get it gets a little bit revolutionary, etc. And that's why the funny thing is the French queen, she was Austrian from birth, etc. So she
Mhm.
wanted, like, she was absolutely fascinated by mesmer. She said, like, she has to leave at least like a few guys who know about these techniques. So I might get into
Mhm.
advantage of it, but he has to leave the country anyway because he's creating unrest. The society of harmony
Mhm.
was like creating some disharmony in like France, like being pre-revolutionary. Uh, but you can say like the revolution was like people, égalité, fraternité, liberté. So
Mhm.
the feeling of equality, everybody's connected to the twitching, to the machinery, etc. Feels equal. So you don't
Mhm.
even have a choice to act otherwise, because when your neighbor is twitching, you're twitching likewise. It's beyond class. So you kind of like
Mhm.
you see like this. It's a big equalizer,
Sure.
like this machine.
And it pulls people together into the
Yeah,
nation state. I think we should stop here now, Martin,
yeah,
because we have many more chapters to go.
yeah. I
This
would say so.
sets up the story. This just starts to set up the story where we're going with a few hints.